But we now must go on a bit to the 20th of January. We were talking about the previous year just then, but we're now on to January, when Peter Shaw moved the motion, which I think I've just read, and we've just done a little diversion. And he said, I take up straight away the point by the member for South Angus, Bruce Gardine, about the fisheries, and so it went on. But the point about this debate was that the treaty, of course, had been drawn up. It was there somewhere in Brussels. And the first person who would actually see it as a member of Parliament, as far as we know, was when the Prime Minister went across on the day to sign it in Brussels. I mean, looking back on it, it is extraordinary that he got away with it at the time. Eric spoke in that debate, and I'll quote what he said on the 20th of January 1972. I have a constitutional principle that no Parliament shall bind its successor. Are there not here the seeds of a potential constitutional conflict between the needs of a future Parliament and the interests of the British people as it might interpret them, and the fact that a previous government had committed the country in perpetuity? By signing a treaty which has no time limit, we need clarification of this fundamental point before the treaty is signed. Following up the point he made much earlier. And there's no real answer to that, other than the people to say there was a technical matter about what was called the Ponsonby Rule, but I won't go into that because it's a bit complex. But even under the rule that had existed, introduced by Lord Ponsonby back in the 20s, that there was a surveillance of the text of a treaty by a select committee or by Parliament itself before it was ratified. The government got away with that by saying, this isn't for ratification. For ratification, we've got to have a bill later on. Then you can decide it all. This is only for the signature, which in constitutional practice of international practice, as indeed it was, the government signed that it was their application. But they could not ratify it until their Parliament, or their dictator, whoever it happened to be, with us it's the Parliament, agreed with the final terms of the treaty by ratification. So the government then said, oh no, to Peter Shaw and Parliament at the time, and Eric also speaking on that debate, by saying, oh no, we can't do it, we've got to sign it, but you'll have another chance later with the bill, which we're not going to discuss tonight, but it came later on, and of course it was only got through by about 8 or 6 or one way or the other in a following year. That is, again, was part of the continuing locking together a chains not of accountability, but a chain of deceit and surrender of British sovereignty of the Crown and people to the powers of the EU. And that was passed. The government wouldn't agree to that. They hadn't published something which the Prime Minister was going to sign the next day, flying to Brussels to do it. Oh no, they wouldn't do that. So the government, this was what was called a supply day motion, where the opposition had the right to move that motion, which they did. That's why Peter Shaw, on behalf of the Labour opposition, was moving it. And anybody who even supported going in could hardly say no to that sensible suggestion. But the government then moved an amendment. The government then moved an amendment against that, and that was what the vote was about. And I'll read the amendment here because it's rather interesting what they said. The government moved an amendment to that, and they said that they would. I've got the wording, but not quite here in the right page. But the amendment was that they wouldn't do it now, but they would do it after it had been signed. And a vote took place on that, and the amendment was agreed to, that the treaty would be presented to the House after signature, not before, and the government won by 21 votes. So again, that was a compounding, the total deceit, both in information, in presentation, and in voting, and in the debates, that the then government got away with something which has become something around a weight around the democratic neck of the United Kingdom ever since.
The government had 3 stages of notifying and gaining parliamentary approval for Britain's entry into the European Economic Community in 1971-72. On the first stage, which we already mentioned, the government said the House should vote in principle in favour, subject to arrangements which were not available in detail to members of the House of Commons when the vote was taken. That was in October 1971. Then in January 1972, the second debate, which Nigel has referred to, the treaty was on the way to being signed and had certainly been drawn up. The treaty, of course, is the formal document which people sign, as distinct from arrangements on various pieces of paper, which are then put together in the treaty. The terms of the treaty were not available to members of Parliament before they were asked to vote on the principle that the treaty arrangement should be acceptable. And then finally, you have the last parliamentary stage, which is the introduction of a bill, the European Communities Bill in 1971, where the details were at last known, but then the authorities of the House, the chairman of Ways and Means in particular, who controlled what sort of amendments could be taken and what could not be, decided that, and I'm sure this was done after consultation with the government of the day, that certain amendments on matters of broad principle were not appropriate to consider in the context of the bill. Other amendments could be, and there are many amendments, but on certain major issues of principle, because a treaty had been signed, it was not possible for the Chair of Ways and Means, and therefore for the House of Commons, to debate such amendments, because they would have been ruled out of order. And that was what 8 hours of points of order in 1970 on the first day were all about. And so the House was deprived at every one of 3 opportunities, each one, of the essential information to enable it to proceed. Now that brings me, and I'm sure Nigel will agree with this, up to date. When the Treaty of Lisbon was eventually signed last year, or do we go back to 2006? But at any rate, the one that the Irish turned down in their referendum last year, when that was signed, that treaty was just by the skin of the government's teeth made available to the House of Commons in the Vote Office just 3 or 4 hours before the major debate was going to begin. So again, they tried to get away with depriving members of the House of Commons of the most essential, basic information to enable members to be informed, fully informed, when taking a major decision of principle.
Well, thank you, Eric, for that. I think that brings us to a very good conclusion. And I have to pay tribute to my friend for all the work that he did, as you say, what he did during the debates, and the fact that without him and without the discussions which we've had together prior to this little production, it would not have been possible, because it is only by the stimulation of our conversations that I've had with him and with others, but principally with Eric and occasionally with David Stoddart. There were 3 of us still active in this area who were active during this period, and I have to thank him and all those who've been very helpful in promoting and carrying out this particular presentation, wherever it finds its elf in the end, and whoever has been watching. Thank you very much.
Thank you.